Welcome to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition. If you've been keeping up with us, we spent the last few years talking to leading voices in podcasts about what they create, why they create it, and the impact they want to have on the world. It's a true roundtable format, but this week in our Industry Edition, it's going to be a little bit less focused on the creators and more about media and audio industry experts and how we adapt to the news of the day. I'm your host, Kyle Jelinek, Senior Account Director here at Oxford Road, and I'm joined by fellow agents of influence, Mr. Dan Granger, our founder and CEO. Welcome,
Hi.
Dan. Kristen Duenas, our Associate Media Director here. Welcome,
Hello,
Kristen.
hello.
Spencer Semonson, our media buyer. Welcome,
Glad
Spencer.
to be back.
Yes. Dan, again, I feel like I'm driving your car. I'm driving the Tesla down the 405, and it's just a little different. It's a little weird.
Feels smooth to me, Kyle. I think you're doing fantastic.
Well, I'm using autopilot actually, so I appreciate that. There's a couple, we're going to talk about the top news stories, a couple things that came up over the last week. Spotify is now the official podcast network in the US based on their reach, which I think we've seen this coming for a long time, and now it's finally official. They're coming out, and it's, at least by one account, they are the number one reach podcast company in the industry. And then secondly, we're seeing, again, the industry in a little bit of a downturn. Acast announced that they laid off 70 different people. And I think that actually leads us to our first story, Dan, which is yours on Patreon.
Well, similar to Acast, at Patreon, there are 17% fewer souls working at the company. It is starting to become a trend really in all industries, but it's getting closer and closer to home, I think, for us that focus on audio. And just as a reminder, like Patreon is effectively the Substack of the type of work that we do. You can't call it audio exactly, but podcast is a big share of what they're doing. And it's really about helping creators not just monetize through advertising, like you might see with an Anchor or something like that, but it's actually about helping them sell subscriptions. And interestingly, because it's not really ad focused, we don't talk a lot about Patreon, but you should know that their last valuation was over $1 billion. So they are a major force in the industry. They may be a bellwether for certain aspects of the industry. The conversation has been happening for years about whether or not the paid subscription product in audio will take hold, whether it will take over, where does it land? And to me, this is an indicator that, look, maybe they're looking at the economic news and they're saying never let a crisis go to waste, and they're saying this is a good time to cut expenses and with that downsize their org. But it also may be very indicative of what we're seeing from all the streaming companies, right? Ever since Netflix started letting people go and decided that they're going to be ad supported, Apple's going to be ad supported. Turns out people do not have unlimited budgets to buy subscriptions for anything that they want just to avoid advertising. And so even though the ad market is getting hit a little bit, we're seeing, I think, the subscription market get hit a lot harder, which is going to cause increasing challenges for, the long tail of user generated content. And I think that we're starting to basically find out where are the edges of what the marketplace will actually allow and accept and subsidize in terms of how many subscriptions we can all pay for out of one checking account. And so, I think it's probably a cautionary tale that we may have found the limits there. And to those people that are looking to monetize their content, my recommendation would be to not say, should I be subscription or should I be ad supported? But I would look at it as a both and scenario where you have a certain gated amount of content that is available to people that'll pay a subscription, but that you also keep your reach available through ad support, because that can be your marketing tool. That's how you get to the masses and figure out who's committed enough to what you do through these free samples that you can actually provide a subscription. And so anybody that's betting too big on subscription alone may have similar problems and may be following behind Patreon. So that's my take.
Yeah, I actually was, weirdly enough, at the advent of Patreon because the co-founder, Jack Conte, is actually the frontman for one of my favorite indie bands, Pomplamoose, which if you did not know.
Who?
Pomplamoose.
We call them grapefruit in the States.
It is, yeah, it's French
Yeah.
for grapefruit. Love it, love it. And I saw like they went on tour and they, in the tour, talked about how they were financing their entire tour through a workaround with Ford. And then soon after, Patreon became a thing. Now, I don't know it as well through like an audio standpoint. I would say that is like straight subscription. I 1000% agree with Dan, because it became a big source of income for YouTube creators during the adpocalypse of 2017, after PewDiePie came out with a lot of incendiary comments and almost no one wanted to work with Google Ads at that point. But what we're seeing now, and I think will become like a bigger boon to the YouTube network industry, is we're working with advertisers, we're working with agencies to have actual like paid spots within the YouTube videos, which are also becoming more and more simulcast with podcasts. And those are direct response advertisers. So I think if YouTubers and some audio creators want to have that workaround in the future, they need to work more with networks who can partner with agencies and bring ad dollars. We don't work a lot with YouTube because attribution is an issue as well as brand safety, but there are a lot of people already in the space like Manscaped, NordVPN, SeatGeek, etc., that are really pioneers and could be like the next big wave for DR agencies.
I mean, what I see, at least, like to Dan's point, those who are using Patreon as kind of like the extra, right? So you listen to the free content and you want the extra hour, you go here. Those are the ones that are doing it right. And I think there's a lot to be gained from that understanding. But, you know, influencer marketing, the next one that we wanted to talk about here is it comes off of an article from theinformation.com about where people are actually going right now with the economic downturn. How are they getting the information? How are they responding? And the creator economy, going local and investing and digging deeper with these influencers is really what we're seeing here. I mean, one of the stats that was in the report that I was reading, 50% of people are taking response based on what they get from influencers. So that's Instagram, YouTube, and our favorite podcast, obviously. Spencer, you had a couple of stats that you were talking about that you saw an ad week on that as well.
Yeah, they just published an article that says that 55% of people trust the advice of influencers and 60% of women polled have bought a product from an influencer in the last year. And I mean, this is a very interesting trend for especially in influencer marketing, because you have the reach that you cannot get with certain other like social media creators or creators in general, but that doesn't always lend to performance. And we've seen that sometimes influencers can even fake their reach. We have influencers renting a private jet for an hour to take pictures for Instagram. We have the advent of fashion, which is literally just to have different outfits on Instagram. We have people faking sponsored content so they can get ad dollars from real sponsored content. And we have to vet all of those options as an agency consistently, even in the podcast space. It's like, do you have a lot of followers? Yes, but will they buy this product? Do they align with the brand values of this advertiser? Maybe not. So it's definitely something that we work within as a DR agency, but it's something to keep in mind as we go into the economic downturn as well.
It sounds like we need our own version of like an ad Fontes tool just for the ad products that are out there to know how reliable they are.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, because who's keeping score on this right now?
I'm not sure anyone is. I know there's tools to check like how many bots for Instagram. I don't know. And we have like obviously audio tools for impressions.
I smell an initiative forthcoming.
Thank you guys. Real quick, we have to do a quick ad for Mrs. T's pierogies. It is Doshinki season. And what is Doshinki without the best tasting pierogies in the market. You can get them at Kroger. You can get them at Myers. I love the pierogies. Dan, what's your favorite brand of pierogi or your favorite style?
Did you just ad-lib this whole thing? I'm so impressed.
Oh my gosh.
Really, really good
I'm
stuff.
a big fan of the sauerkraut. But yeah, I mean, so anyway, Mrs. T's pierogies, fantastic. Get them
promo code Jelinek.
Promo code Jelinek. All right, moving on. Spencer, you were talking about, when influencer marketing goes wrong. And I think we got a really great case of that with, I don't even want to say Mr. Andrew Tate, with Andrew Tate. Like, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Who's Andrew Tate, by the way?
It's so weird. He's a former kickboxing champion and he's a minor UK reality star on like UK Big Brother. And in a very short amount of time, he's created an entire empire of toxic masculinity through mass messaging on TikTok. So he's been in the podcast space. He's had like multiple podcasts. And the reason why they're becoming extremely popular is because he actually has many followers pushing the video aspect, the simulcast aspect on TikTok. So there's just constant accounts posting TikToks of everything that he says. And this is extremely interesting because he's recently been banned on literally everything. TikTok, finally Spotify booted him. That was like the last place for the audio. YouTube has booted him. He recently said that Airbnb even won't work with him and Uber, just like personally. And it's the reason why this one is extremely important to understand and like look at what has transpired is because it relays into a lot of things that we're talking about, right? We have influencer marketing, like who are we working with? Who are we putting brands next to? We have brand safety, which we're always thinking about as an agency. And we also have to look at the advent of video and podcasting and how it's being used to market to people, the reach that it engenders, which is good for us in many ways, but can also be a terrible tool for a monster like this person. And we also have lookalikes emerging. So we have to think about that, especially because they are on networks with brand safe options. And like, I don't think that I'm ever a person as a planner who would look at something and not innately know the content or the person behind it. But for somebody who doesn't have an agency behind them, it could easily go wrong. So this is a big one for me. I don't know how the rest of you feel. Kristen, how do you feel from like a media standpoint, from a planning standpoint, when you look at something like this?
It's funny to me because when you talk about Oxford Road and we have that wonderful partnership with Barometer that allows us to look at brand safety within podcasts, right? You've got your transcripts, it's AI, it's this agnostic view of like what is actually in the body of a podcast. We don't have anything like that in influencer marketing. So, here we are with a lot of different clients and more we're seeing that clients want to have some sort of simulcast opportunity with the podcast audio going into like a TikTok or YouTube even, and where it might be relatively brand safe on a podcast front, everything that happens on the video side is not necessarily going to be included in that. And so they're doing all of this other extra stuff that then can come back and create a lot of backlash. So, you do really have to take a look at that, all of the marketing platforms, and really be strategic and careful about, who you're partnering with at any given time. It's not, the two things are not always going to be equal, podcast and video components.
I'll add one small note just while we're on the topic of Barometer. One of the things that is hard about brand safety and suitability is that the controversies that a brand might be concerned about don't necessarily happen on the podcast.
Right.
And so one of the new features that Barometer is launching actually does social listening to pick up what's going on with the personality outside of the show that you're sponsoring, which is a really, really critical piece, as we all know, because we get sent to the principal's office when there's a problem, regardless of if it had something to do with the show itself that was sponsored, right? So I think that there are some things being introduced technologically that can reduce the surprises that come from stuff like this.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
No, that's huge. I think, I mean, so many times, like you'll everything looks great on paper, right? And then it's the contextual feedback that you get, not only maybe from an advertiser, but from on social media, where you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? And how do we not see this coming? And the fact that we have tools like Barometer that can suss those things out in advance is a game changer. Having been here for 9 years and seeing all the potential downfalls. Yes, Spencer?
Absolutely. I remember, just as an anecdotal story, I had an advertiser once. I get all these messages and they're like, this is all over Twitter, this terrible thing has happened. And the podcast hadn't posted yet because it was only available on Patreon. So we had a whole day where we're able to deal with the brand safety backlash because we didn't even know what the content was that we were talking about.
Oh yeah. And think about, what if that podcast was actually on YouTube, which is actually our next story. Kristen, we're seeing a lot more of this podcast YouTube integrations. What do you want to share with the team here? Actually, this is Spencer. I'm so sorry. This is a Spencer show here this week. Spencer, you're got everything.
I know.
It's good. We love the Spencer show. It's fantastic.
We love the Spencer show. It's an offshoot of this podcast, inside of this podcast.
It's an upgrade. Yes. It's premium. It should be on Patreon. Yeah, exactly.
This is the Patreon content. Oh my God.
$45 an episode if you want to listen.
Let's go.
With everything.
Okay. Is that how much Kyle got for the pierogi ad though? Because I want more than
we'll see. It's a CPA deal.
Okay.
Can we add a new segment to this show where Kyle just does bullshit endorsements spontaneously in the middle of the program? Because I think that's a good bit. I think that works really well.
Is it a bullshit endorsement or did Kyle work in trade? I feel like if we went into his freezer right now,
you wouldn't. That's the best part about Kyle. You'll never know.
A, it was a bullshit endorsement, but B, if you went into my freezer, you would see Mrs. T's amazing pierogies.
That's a real thing.
It's a real thing. Yeah,
okay.
It really is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the second mid-roll. Oh.
Yeah.
Yes. This kind of just goes with the last one. So we're just rolling with it. YouTube and audio have started to merge in podcasting, and it's not a new trend. It's one that has been ramping up, especially in interview style podcasts, for quite some time. They are booming. YouTube itself is getting its own platform for podcasts and is bringing on its own podcast manager. This is probably in direct competition with Spotify, which has had video integrated features into its podcast app for a long time, which is interesting because we talked about that in a previous episode about the charts for Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So there's a layer there. And as these larger interviewers keep growing, including like Logan Paul, H3H3, Joe Rogan, we'll only continue to see this happening in this space. I don't see it happening outside of interview style podcasts like news or fiction, because that would just be at that point a documentary. But it's interesting to think about from a performance standpoint. Kristen, did you have any additional comments on this as well?
Yeah, so I'm going to tell a little story. I was in a podcast movement, flew into Dallas from LA, and I get into my Lyft, and my Lyft driver's like, "Oh, you're going to this conference. What's a podcast about? Blah blah blah." And I'm talking to him, and he tells me he's never listened to a podcast on an app. Never, ever has he done it. He listens to his podcasts on YouTube. And this was the first time I'd ever heard somebody say these words. I'm going, wait a second. You're telling me that you listen to a podcast on YouTube. How is that even possible? And what got more and more interesting is as the conference went on over 3 days, and I'm talking to all my network partners, they're telling me how they are planning on putting more of their podcasts up on YouTube, and not necessarily in a video component where you get to see the podcaster interview a person, right? We're not talking actual moving video. They were talking about the audio of a podcast on YouTube with just a title card playing at the whole time. And it turns out that they've done some testing with this, and they're finding that there's a lot of response and performance there with their podcasts that are just airing on YouTube. So I think, we're going to see more and more like splintering of media where, you know, we've have all these different apps for podcasts. We've got iHeart, we've got Spotify, you've got, you know, the Apple podcast apps. And now people are going to just start going to YouTube to listen to their podcast because they're already on there watching other video content. So if it's available, why would they switch apps? So, you know, to me, that I thought was fascinating. And, you know, it's a little bit different than what you're saying as far as like the video with actual people, but it's all under that same format where, you know, people are going to find what they're looking for in the one place and try and consolidate as much as possible.
One thing I'll add to this is that there are a number of technologies coming out that will take the transcript of the podcast and then source visual content, whether it's a Wikipedia page or, you know, a headshot or a bio or whatever. And it is trying to use, you know, some level of AI to create a visual component that is dynamic, that isn't just a static, you know, image like we've seen on podcasts for years when somebody wants to distribute their show that way. So I think it may continue to push in that direction. Like with anything that's, you know, AI, we have to see, does the application actually work, or does it start putting up irrelevant images based on keywords and not really context, you know? So we'll see how effective it is, but definitely I think that it adds value when you can make a podcast more like a TV show because you're engaging people that much more and it becomes more of a destination. Let's be honest about what podcasts is, though. It is something that you do while you're doing another thing, typically. And that's the difference with audio. You're driving, you're walking, you're folding laundry, but you're not like keeping a podcast on while you have a conversation. And you probably don't like podcast and chill at night and just like sit and do that as a destination. Like it's the thing that comes with you. So anything that moves it more to be something that is entirely engrossing of your energy, I think that just makes it that much more valuable. And that's why we see more, like 1 + 1 = 3 when you have the elements of a visual podcast that is distributed on YouTube and as an audio feed. We always see those things working better. And I think it's because it's engaging people on more levels than we can do simply with audio.
That's a fact. You know what else is a fact is Mrs. T's Pierogies is all about helping you whip up meals that the whole family will love. And whether it's their full-size pierogies or mouth-watering main dish, or their amazing minis. Kristen, have you tried the mini pierogies that they're making over at Mrs. T's? They're fantastic.
You know, I haven't yet, but I have a question for you, Kyle. Are you a fry and butter pierogi user or a boil in water? I mean,
it's a great question. I'm both actually. I boil in water, then I'll pan fry them afterwards, and then a little dollop of sour cream goes a long way. Yeah,
it really does.
But
is
anyway,
there a discount that you're offering while this is happening?
Yeah, it's 10% when you use, again, promo code Jelinek at checkout. Anyway,
you spell that?
Jelinek. It's very phonetic. It's fantastic. And speaking of Kristen, you have another thing to share with us. Spotify, they announced a big deal this week.
Yeah, they did. So one of the things that happens when Spotify becomes like one of the #1 networks is we get to talk about them a lot. And they signed a deal with Wattpad to bring fiction writers to podcasts. And for those who aren't in the know, Wattpad is an online website and or app that lets self-published authors put out their work for millions and millions of people to read and comment on and subscribe to, and it's global. So what Spotify has done is they are going to be testing in Asia, primarily in Indonesia and Philippines, bringing stories from Wattpad to life through a range of podcasts. They're going to do 20 titles to start as they test this. And it's going to be available to listeners on their streaming platform. Now, here's where things are fascinating to me. So fiction podcasts are more and more increasing in listener numbers, right? We've got Realm, which is a network that's getting bigger with their podcasts. Disney has, Marvel fiction podcasts, and it's a largely untapped underserved audience for marketers. Now, while Spotify is testing this in Asia, what this opens up, and I had to look these numbers up on Wikipedia, and I think my eyeballs popped out of my head. Their stories are available in more than 50 languages. They have over 300,000 writers from 35 different countries, and they have 90 million users on a monthly basis. So this is going to take a lot of these users are going to follow their favorite authors over and start listening to these stories in audio form. This is going to be a whole new realm of possibilities for marketers and also for Spotify.
That's huge.
It's huge. It's huge.
Huge.
I love this from multiple angles because
because you read books. You're like actually literate and you spend time absorbing literature through your eyes, not even audible, right?
I use my English degree, and which is just a book reading degree, and I love it. And I haven't read a lot on Wattpad, to be honest, but I've heard a lot of my friends have Kindles just so they can use Wattpad and different fan fiction sites. And from a marketing perspective, this is actually really interesting because it's kind of cyclical how audio works, because radio started as, you know, serials and dramas of a fictional nature after the ads were placed. And actually soap operas, I'm channeling Stu Redwine right now. Soap operas got their name as 15-minute radio serials that were all sponsored by soap companies. So that is why soap operas are called that. As someone, I actually grew up listening to like really old 1940s, 1930s radio dramas, especially horror ones. And I can still remember the ads for some of them and actually recite them. I think this is something that VR hasn't really tapped into that much because we love a host read, and fiction is harder. Like the narrator's kind of outside of the realm of the content. So I don't think we've tested it enough as an agency, and many agencies haven't, but it kind of makes sense to do, especially with it growing substantially, because there are announcer and producer reads on some of our top performers, especially in the news category and sports category. And if fiction performs as well, I see this as a home run. I would love to align more of our clients with this kind of content going forward.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, I think the more interesting ways that we can go, and we always see this is like the past becomes the future, and this is another example of that. And speaking about the future, Dan, I mean, we've been talking about smart speakers and what they can be capable of for years now. And some of those things that we prognosticated, I think, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years ago are finally coming into fruition. You wanted to share an article about Alexa and what they're doing with ad opportunities.
I do, but you want to know what since we're doing like spontaneous topics here, there is something I want to bring up that's been on my mind and my heart for a while, which is where's Giles? How come we don't have Giles here ever? And I just want to put it out there to the group, because if we could all draft one person from the company whose voice should be heard by this community, is there anybody you'd rather hear on this show more than Giles? And why is he never here? Open to your thoughts.
I need to bully him.
Please, will you please bully Giles?
We just did our anti-bullying harassment training, so maybe we don't bully Giles.
No, Melissa, don't listen to this. Michelle, don't listen to this.
Well, maybe we could invite him more persuasively, perhaps. But I feel like, you know, for example, you've all been working on this Alexa stuff that we're about to talk about. You've all been pivotal in this. Kristen's really leaned in heavily. And as far as I know, we're probably like the foremost sponsor of flash briefings in the universe, I would imagine. Giles was a critical part of that. He's there every step of the way. He's always 10 steps ahead of everybody. And so I'd like to hear his voice here. And I just want to call him out publicly on this show that Giles, where are you? We need you here participating. So I'm going to put that on record. As far as what's happening with Alexa, yes, you all have a smart speaker device. And if you're close to one right now, and I say, hey, Alexa, how do I get a stain out of my carpet? Okay, Alexa's going to start answering now. And what is amazing is that because voice, like the Internet of Things version of voice search, it's going to be a lot more like search as we understand it online. And you're actually going to be able to serve not just organic answers to frequently asked questions, but you can sponsor those answers. And so if you think about what's going on today, like we knew this was coming. We have talked about this. We have prognosticated about this from our agency, but it's been such a nascent industry. It's been so early that there really wasn't a rush to get involved with it for many brands. Now is the time. If you are a brand, imagine that Google was just invented and you wanted to be the answer to the question, you know, how do I solve ABC problem? And your product solves ABC problem. This is the time to teach the search engine that you are the answer to that question, and you can actually get in position to buy your way in. One of the differences between search and voice search is that you can't have just a page of responses, because nobody's going to sit there and listen to an answer to the question that reads through 4 sponsor messages before it gives you 17 organic answers on one page. So being in first position is everything. It is a race. On your market, set, go. Figure out how to integrate your business with Alexa so that your brand is the answer to any relevant question. It's just going to keep accelerating.
I definitely agree with you. And I would like to thank you for making Alexa tell me all about how to.
Did it work? Did I set off your?
It showed. Again. Thanks. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Fantastic. Our last story here is, I think, a bit of a feel good. It hit the news waves last week about the Patagonia founder who literally put his money where his mouth is and gave the company away. And basically, rather than going public, he went the opposite and gave the company to only pursue environmental concerns and make the world a little bit better place, not for profit. And I think we see this so much where companies they align with a specific cause. And I think that's always met with like a certain sense of cynicism of like, do they truly believe this? And this is an account where they did exactly what we always hoped they were with Patagonia, and really kind of they put their flag in the sand and said, this is it, and this is what we're doing. Did you guys all see that? What did you guys think about it?
Well, I definitely saw it, and hats off to Patagonia for truly living the purpose-driven brand. I mean, they're like the quintessential. They're really the definition of living purpose, right? That being said, let's be honest, they're human, and there are a lot of legitimate news organizations. Like right now, you can find on QZ.com, Quartz is reporting that there are major tax benefits to having taken this approach. And so, you know, at the end of the day, if you're the founder of Patagonia, are you going to have more money in your pocket because you did this thing, which on its face is purely charitable? Or was it a clever maneuver that also happens to support your beliefs? I guess we don't know the answer to that. We don't know exactly what the difference is and how much is kept and what the benefits of the tax savings are, but we know that they're significant, and there's a lot of people reporting about this. So I think it's good to honor the transaction and the statement that was made, and that it's a further continuation on a scale with a series of events of really being environmentally focused as a brand and trying to put your money where your mouth is. But let's also at the same time balance that with the reality that there are financial benefits in this type of instrumentation or transaction that would not be available if you just did it the old fashioned way.
So you're telling me this is not 100% philanthropic? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, very little is, right? You know, it's a cold world out there, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It's helpful. It's a good thing, but you got to be careful when when we mistake something that has self-interest and charitable interest all happening at the same time, that we don't over-index on one or the other, because I think a lot of times these are both and by the way, we've said very many times on this show, because it's our belief as an organization, purpose and profit are not mutually exclusive. It is not a bad thing to make money doing what you believe in and what you want to do, as long as you disclose that, as long as you're out in the open about that, and your purposes are sincere. And I think that's true for Patagonia. There's no question. You can't take that away from these guys. I would just say there's tax avoidance at play as well,
Well, and think about it too. It's like, yeah, they're not mutually exclusive, but it's an OTO. It's a one-time only tax avoidance versus an ongoing benefit to these, philanthropic efforts. And I think one definitely should outweigh the other.
Sure. Well, and let's also remember that this great country of ours that we all believe in so deeply, a lot of the reasons that we started was avoidance of taxes. So who are we to judge?
All right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up this edition of Media Roundtable. Thank you guys for joining, everybody. It was a good one. Dan, it's been a pleasure driving your car again.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
Can you get Giles in the car next time? I'll sit out if he'll do it, whatever it takes.
Him. He'll ride shotgun. I think we can make this happen.
Hey, Kyle, sure. I think you should take us out with a post roll.
Well, of course,
Well, hold on a minute. Wait a second. Spencer did tease earlier that she remembers ads from the 1940s that she used to sit around and listen to. Apparently, as a child, she was sitting around listening to a radio and old-timey ads that she happened to memorize. Can we maybe give her a chance?
Oh yeah, Spencer. Let's hear one of your old-timey ads.
Or maybe we can get a deep cut from Pompladiva. What the hell is it?
Pomplamoose.
Perfect.
I have the ad. It's slick, so slick. No, it's smooth, so slick, so slick. It's a smooth, slick shave you get with MOLLE. Dun, 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 dun. Mole, the heavier brush with shaving cream for a tougher whisker or tender skin.
Amazing.
I don't even think Mole is a thing anymore.
How many times do you think you had to hear that before you memorized it?
30, 40 times.
Less impressive, but still cool.
I was 11, Dan.
Why were you listening to this at 11?
Strange child, Dan.
I like it. I'm impressed.
I think that brings up a frequency question.
Yeah, 37 times before memorization.
Well, nobody does jingles on podcasts. We need to bring the jingle back to podcasts for sure. Bill Burr's the only game in town for musical.
This show is still dedicated to bringing the jingle back and our mission of mobilizing marketers to advance truth and civility in journalism. We want you not to just know the news, but to use it for good. If you're a marketer looking to balance business objectives with your brand values, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Thank you, Bianca, Kristen, me, Spencer, Jennifer, the team at Podcast One, and as always, influence responsibly.
Oh, and by the way, if you feel like the show could just level up a little bit, please email Giles at oxfordroad.com, Giles at oxfordroad.com, and invite him on the show. It'll make it better.
Fantastic. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.